Welcome to a Kids Life podcast. I'm Angela Lockwood, and thanks for joining me today. I hope you had a chance to listen to the last episode where I interviewed Victoria Edmond about building foundations through family daycare. It was episode 51. If you haven't had a listen, we had a really good conversation about some of the concerns that I had when I had little kids about going to family daycare versus more childcare settings. And Victoria knows what she's talking about. She is an approved provider, and she has in her Rainbow Bridge Family Daycare, she has a whole network of family daycare centres under her umbrella. And so she knows the issues, the concerns, the benefits as well of having kids in family daycare. But today we're going to shift a little bit of our attention over to childcare settings. And one of the things that I am really passionate about is inclusion. And inclusion around having kids with additional needs and disabilities in mainstream settings. There are so many benefits to this. And I just obviously today want to talk to you about why this is important for us to have conversations about, what benefits it has for others and for the kids themselves, even for the educators and for families. Now, I do have a program that is coming up called Inclusion Starts. And if you are interested, if you are a director of a childcare service and you have people, educators in your centre who would benefit from having professional development and even support, one-on-one support through a live online program, then take a look over at inclusionstarts.com. And have a look at the program, see if it fits your service. But I can guarantee you that I've put my heart and soul into that program because my work in the last 20 years working with educators in schools and in childcare centres, one thing I know is that the more knowledge, the more confidence and the more understanding our educators have about children with additional needs, diverse needs, with a whole range of different abilities, then what we're doing is we're setting up really positive foundations for our kids, great learning experiences that sets them up for a successful learning journey from when they're little right throughout their schooling. And what we're also doing is teaching tolerance and understanding and also really good, deep relationships within all of the kids. And that's one of the benefits around inclusion is that it's a really powerful concept. And the thing with inclusion is it actually lies at the heart of how we relate to others. And rather than it becoming this big, scary concept, which I do hear a lot, people go, oh my gosh, by being inclusive, does that mean we're being exclusive to other people? Or how do we actually instill inclusion? And, I don't want to say anything to get anything wrong. Or, these concerns I hear far and wide and really common. When you have conversations with people around sometimes with disability or with difference or people who might feel marginalized, then people can often become quite fearful about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. We don't want to put people offside. But what I always say in all of my programs when we talk about inclusion, if you take a step back from all of that and you step into it with care and looking at how we relate to others with respect and understanding, then anything that you do will come from a place of goodness. It'll come from a place of caring, of empathy, of wanting to have good relationships with people. And that is the best foundation that we can have. But inclusion really goes beyond just simply providing environments that are safe and nurturing, but it also encompasses a commitment to embracing who people are and ensuring that everyone feels valued and included. And I'm sure if you put yourself in this situation, you may have actually had a situation like this yourself before, where you've gone into a new environment, and that time I'm thinking of so many times myself here. That moment when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking and they turn, and full well that they're talking about you. It is the worst feeling because you think that you're stepping into the unknown, that you don't know what they're saying about you, or they don't know what they're thinking about you. All you know is that you being a presence in that room has created something to shift. And what I've seen to be true with working with so many little kids is they also feel this. It's not something just that adults feel. They're very aware if they are different to others. They're very aware if people are talking about them. They're very aware if they're not a part of the in crew. And all these things that arise for little tiny kids, even in these sort of childcare centres, so, from 0 to 5 years old, for these little guys, particularly in this sort of stage of their life, they're building a sense of identity. They're building this sense of who I am. What does the world think of me? What do I think about myself in this world? So the more positive experience we can give children of all needs at this early stage of their life really sets up a positive framework for them to work off, a really good sense of self-identity, but also not just for the individual themselves. What we're doing when we're creating these really inclusive environments where everyone feels valued and included, it shows all of the kids that we all have value in community. We all have value within this world. And that just because that person might think a little bit differently to you, or their body needs to move more than what yours does, or they come in a little bit later, or they have difficulty in certain things that you don't, what we start to do is we teach our kids that difference is okay. That just because somebody doesn't behave or be or listen or think or act the way that you do doesn't make them any less or any better than you. It just makes them different to you. And when we can embrace that thinking for little kids, what they start to see is that we all have value in life. And my gosh, isn't that just the most important thing to set up for our little guys? And, just while I think of that sort of thinking, is that when we also have little kids that are building a sense of identity and confidence even in who they are, what we're also setting up is really a great opportunity for our kids to have positive social networks, really good peer networks where they have great friends, that they can connect with people. They can see people for who they are. And what that does is it helps kids to develop really rich and diverse relationships with people. And through that, they learn so much about themselves and the world around them. So inclusion is at these early sort of childcare ages, these really sort of young ages, benefits everybody. It benefits the kids, it benefits the educators, and it also benefits the families that come into the centre and understand that inclusion is just what that place does. So when it comes to, let's have a little look more about what inclusion actually looks like in this sort of early educational settings. And it really, inclusion looks at accommodating kids, obviously, we've talked about, of all abilities, different backgrounds and different circumstances. And if you've been following my work, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked in educational settings for nearly 20 years as an occupational therapist. And I've been working alongside educators to foster these inclusive environments for kids with additional needs. And a really big interest area of mine, as I've mentioned, is in those early years, that time before a kid goes to school. And these early years are vital in building, as I said, the best foundations for our kids. And what we do early, we all benefit from later. We also know that educators, and if you're an educator, you know this, you play such a vital role in promoting equality and building these strong foundations for kids. I often think that teachers are so underappreciated. Educators, particularly in these early years, are so underappreciated. And it's not until you step into these centres that you look and you think, wow, like people really trust. And there's a lot of trust for these educators with their kids in these early years because of those really early vital foundations that kids are getting in these early years. Educators are the ones that are there each and every day supporting our kids. And if you haven't been in there, and I am surprised sometimes, I have to admit that parents haven't actually spent some time in a childcare centre and just looked around at, what our educators actually do for our kids. They're really there providing these environments and learning and enriching experiences for our kids. And so that's why it's really important for us to invest this time in effort into helping our teachers and our educators be confident in adapting and in implementing inclusive practices in their classrooms, because there is so much that they're working on. There's so much that they're focusing on. What's their developmental needs? What's their relational needs? What's their feeding needs? What's their sleeping needs? And when we can look at all of those things and bring it into a space where every one of those kids can flourish and the educators are feeling supported, then it's a real win-win situation for them. So let's have a look at the kids. So we've talked about the educators. Let's have a look at why inclusion actually helps children. How does it help the kids? And we know that when kids grow up in inclusive settings, whether that be childcare centres, whether that be in the family home, whether that be at school, they're exposed to a diverse range of perspectives, experiences, and cultures. When when my elder son was up, when he was little and going to childcare, we were living in Darwin at the time, at the top end here in Australia. And I can remember I loved the experience that we had there, because there was just such a diversity of culture in there. We had children from a whole range of different backgrounds. And as a parent, I got to build really positive relationships with the parents who were from cultures that normally I wouldn't have had the opportunity to connect with. And so what that did for me and my family and for my kids is that we saw those cultures as an enriching part of our lives. It wasn't something that we, were either fearful of, or it wasn't they weren't from backgrounds or cultures or people who, we were even intrigued with. It wasn't anything like that, because we know that with difference becomes a little bit of the unknown. What we did is, because we had these beautiful experiences with different cultures in those early years, I would say that my son's grown up to be really a tolerant, very understanding, but also just accepting young man, which I find, is a value for my family that we value really highly. And it was through these early experiences in the childcare centre where, the kids they'd be doing different paintings about different cultures. They'd be learning about different countries. They'd have parents come in and talk to all of the kids about their background and where they came from. And this also just adds that sort of richness of different perspectives and experiences for our little kids. And for all kids, really, inclusion, it's just about enriching their learning environment for them. And they can learn from one another, celebrate their differences, but also importantly, their similarities. Because we know when we know difference, we can also see what makes us similar and what connects us. And that's the stuff that builds these beautiful relationships for kids when they go through their schooling life and also into adult life. We become peers and individuals rather than something that separates us through difference. And by sort of incorporating these practices into this early stage, there's also, I've sort of mentioned it a couple of times, a greater empathy, tolerance, and increased confidence to make connections with all people of all cultures, of all abilities, and also this sense of strength and leadership. And that is being able to stand up and speak and almost advocate sometimes for when things aren't going the way that we hope. That a child has the confidence to be able to go, do you know what? I don't know why you're picking on that person, but that's not okay. And being able to see that respect and develop respect for people for who they are and for being an individual rather than difference. Now, for the teachers, there's a whole range of really positive things that we go through in Inclusion Starts. And I'm, as I said at the beginning, I'm really passionate about this program because we cover some really important topics like understanding inclusion and understanding additional needs and what that looks like in children, but also how to communicate with confidence with the children and also with families, but also with each other as educators. And the last module, which it's a 4-module program, is a really lovely component. The last module is really around how do we build teams of supports around educators. Because if we look at additional needs with kids, the kids can be very busy bodies. They can sometimes be behaviorally challenging for us. They can be energetically challenging for us, and that can really be exhausting. It can add to a lot of overwhelm for educators. And knowing that they've got that team of support around them helps them not to feel so alone. And knowing who exactly to tap into for the things that they need not only helps them to feel the support, but it also helps them understand and become more educated. And then again, that way things become a lot easier. There's a lot more understanding, and also the teachers and the educators know exactly what to do when in the moment when that child needs it. And for the kids who, and as I said, my special interest, I guess, is for kids with additional needs when it comes to inclusion. And what I know is that the children the other students in the class or the other kids in the center, those kids grow up in a way that they sort of develop this strong sense of self-worth and belonging. They have a positive self-esteem and self-advocacy skills. That's the kids that are in the center, but that's also the individuals themselves, the kids themselves. They see kids as a peer, as I've said, and I've mentioned this a couple of times because I think what we think is inclusion is about having a child with additional needs or from a different ability, bringing them into a center and just either plonking them in the middle of a room and going, good luck, hope it all goes according to plan. Or sometimes what I have seen is that these kids are getting segregated. And what they're doing is they're being removed almost not from a behavioral intervention point of view, but just from a management point of view, that they're being removed from the rest of their peers, thinking that this is a good way for them to learn and also for the other kids to be able to learn and have positive experiences. But we know that's not true. When we have kids who are all in the same class, who are all learning from each other, and you have a strong, inclusive culture within your center, and you have educators that are confident in knowing what to do, when to do it, when the child needs a strategy or an intervention, then the whole experience for everybody becomes positive, and it also doesn't become reactive. You're putting in more strategies that creates an environment of inclusion where everyone's learning needs, everyone's styles, everyone's behaviors can actually be encouraged and adopted and supported in the way that they need. So if you are super interested in Inclusion Starts, the great part of it is that I am doing it live, which I am really excited about. It's not a pre-recorded program because one of the things I know when I go into childcare centres is the benefit of me being in a presence in that centre and the educators being able to ask me questions about either specific kids around strategies that they can use when a child's doing something in particular, or even just questions about managing their own beliefs or managing their own way that they're dealing with the differences in the classroom. So having that person live that they can talk to, that can be a support for them, that is also somebody who's not with them all day, every day, has been a huge benefit for so many educators. And I hear it all the time. I get all the DMs and all the emails and all the messages of educators saying, thank you so much. I found that so valuable just to have you to ask questions, to give your insights and your perspective. So that's why I've decided to make sure that the program is live so that over the 4 sessions, the educators can have me to ask me any questions so that we can talk through different strategies, different ideas. So it is a program that has a lot of learning, but also a lot of collaboration built into it. So if you're interested, head on over to inclusionstarts.com or you can check it out at my website at angelalockwood.com.au. But I think when we look at it, all in all, and you've probably got the theme throughout this whole podcast, is this whole episode is that inclusion's not just a buzzword. It's not just this big concept that just seems too hard to be able to access. It's a really fundamental principle, and it really will shape the way that our kids develop, but also the future of early childhood education. And when you can embrace and implement inclusive practices within your centre, childcare providers, which I know that they always want to do, they create a nurturing, empowering, and transformative environment for their children. And I know that if for childcare centres to be completely inclusive and holistic and really empowering for our kids, then what needs to happen is 3 things. is that our educators need to have a really good understanding around what inclusion is and the differences in our kids. They also need to have the knowledge and the skills to be able to implement things as they need, but also to create that inclusive environment. But they also need to feel really confident and to be able to back themselves, that they know what they need to do when they need to do it, and that they have their team of support around them to call on when they have any questions. So if you've enjoyed today and this has really spiked your interest around inclusion, and if you're from a childcare centre, please reach out. You can head on over to angelalockwood.com.au, check out the program at inclusionstarts.com. But over the next couple of weeks, I'll be sharing more and more with you around what inclusion looks like, some of those strategies, and some of the things that you can do in your centre to help bring out the best in all kids, no matter their needs. Until next time, I'm Angela Lockwood. Thanks for listening here on A Kid's Life podcast. And thanks for all the care that you have for our kids.